welcome.
Thank you. They gave me a big glass of wine, so.
Yes. And Sexton style.
That's right.
Thank you, Tim. In the wings, I heard a phone go off, and I thought, fantastic, it gives me an opportunity to say my favorite haiku. Everywhere I go, the sound of one phone ringing. So we start tonight with a problem. You're a struggling author. You're about to turn 50. A wedding invitation arrives on your desk from an ex-boyfriend. And you think what to do. If I accept the invitation and go to the wedding, it's going to be awkward. If I refuse, I'm going to admit defeat. So what do you do?
Accept them all.
Accept them all.
Every invitation in your inbox.
Which is the premise of this novel. Which leads into my first question. What can you share with us about pruning roses?
I should tell you that I had a job for about 2 years just recently as director of an artist residency program in Tuscany, an hour outside of Florence.
No.
And
Poor man.
and as director, that was not the top. The top was the president, 93-year-old Baronessa Beatrice Monti della Corte Bonazzori. And you laugh, the Italian thinks it's a normal name. And part of being the director was helping to choose the writers was not the most important part of it.
Right.
It was really about trying to recreate the atmosphere she had made. That was this cosmopolitan, artistic world that writers would come to from around the world and be in conversation and sometimes in conflict. And that meant learning how to prune the roses correctly.
Of course.
So she gave me a book on pruning roses in Italian.
Right.
And a pair of shears and says, you must learn properly. Yeah.
So is there a trick?
I have no idea. It was in Italian. I tried to read that book, but I got her to teach me because she would just go out and do it herself. And someone here must know the trick. Is it like the second thorn or something above the...
Some nods.
Someone knows.
Yeah.
I see roses all over the place here. You people know. Well, I was no good at it, so.
But conversation. What makes a good conversation?
Well, I'll tell you what the Baronessa would say.
Yes.
She would say, because the problem, and this is why you didn't want all Americans there, for instance, because if you get all Americans and you don't have anyone leading the table in conversation, they will talk about brands of bug repellent.
Right.
You know, that's a conversational topic to an American. And that's not what she wanted. She wanted something that was vibrant. She wanted, dirty stories were fine.
Right.
Good jokes were fine.
Yeah.
A political discussion was fine, and religion and all the things you're not supposed to talk about. Or I was raised not to talk about. She said you don't talk about medical procedures.
Right. Okay.
Because they're boring to anyone who hasn't had them. And then someone else is going to want to talk about theirs. You don't talk about remodeling your house. And you don't talk about travel problems. Yeah.
Right.
They're
Visas.
They're not moments of connection. They're just moments of just getting something off your chest. And that's not for the dinner table.
So would you lead the conversation?
Well, she would lead the conversation somewhat, but she was slightly hard of hearing, and there was a particular. She had a problem with the Australian accent.
Ah, wow.
I know. I was surprised by it. But she would listen and listen to writers who would come, like Richard Flanagan would be there, or Abigail Ullman, and she would say, "I'm sure you've said something brilliant." She just couldn't crack it. She didn't know it. So that was a tough one at conversation. She could get through other impenetrable accents. She was used to that. But the very common Australian one was a kryptonite.
Right.
So then you could say anything you wanted, you know?
Yeah. So when you were a boy growing up in Rockville, Maryland.
Rockville, Maryland, that's right.
Did you ever imagine that one day you'd be sitting at a table with a baronessa in Tuscany, having just got the phone call while pruning roses that you'd won the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, maybe I did.
Maybe you did.
In some sort of like Barbie doll fantasy, like, here's the Baronessa, and you won a prize. Yeah. I would not have expected that. I would have learned after having put her incontinent pug in diapers and tucked it in bed with her. Yeah. It was less glamorous than it seemed.
But we don't talk about that.
I talk about it all the time because I just couldn't believe it that I was there doing my job. Part of my job was training the dog to wear some diapers that I had ordered from China that had suspenders on them and polka dots because I thought it would be more elegant,
Right.
somehow, or funny to the Baronessa, because Margaret Atwood was coming, and I thought we
Right.
couldn't have surprises all over the dining room with Margaret Atwood there.
Is she as intimidating as she seems?
It turned out she would have been fine with it. I've never seen such a practical woman writer arrive. She came, maybe it's because she's truly Canadian. She came with like walking sticks and like hats that could reverse to be waterproof and like she'd do anything.
Yeah.
She was totally prepared.
Well, how does that? You told me backstage about the autograph device that she possibly invented, is it?
Well, she said that has anyone know about this? The long pen that Margaret Atwood does. She doesn't, and she invented this a while ago and patented it. That she didn't want to travel for book tour anymore, so she wanted to autograph books. So she has something where she will sign it from home, and electronically it will send it to the device that's on the book and sign the book. It also turned out to be useful for like medical documents and legal documents, and she told me that she made more off that than from the books.
Smart woman.
That is a smart woman in many ways. She's like the literary Hedy Lamarr,
So
Very obscure referencing.
Did you want to be a novelist from the earlier stage, or did that sneak up on you?
I did. Yeah. I planned to do that since I was, certainly when I was 16, I wrote a novel wanting to be a novelist. Yeah, terrible novel.
Yeah.
I sent it to publishers.
Yeah. How many?
One. There was a young adult fiction contest, and now the category of young adult fiction didn't exist in the 80s, particularly, yet. I didn't know about it. So I thought it was for young adults to write fiction. So I wrote the kind of like gothic Wuthering Heights thing and sent it away, and it was sent back to me.
Right.
I have it still. It did not win
Right. So that was at 16.
at 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what was the next novel?
Oh, gosh. No one's ever asked that follow-up question. I wrote the next novel I wrote in college. It was about a young gay man who was visited by the ghost of Carol Lombard.
Oh. A mystery.
Did I think I would be with a Baronessa one day or what?
I think you did.
And there was some sort of there was a pill that could make you stop regretting things or something. It was a mess.
Ah.
Yeah.
Right.
And I tried to sell that in New York.
Make you stop forgetting things.
Stop regretting things.
Oh, regretting things. Ah, dangerous.
We already have it.
So, you and I are about the same age-ish.
Are we?
You
I'm
might
older.
be a little bit older.
No, I'm older.
Yeah. And I was living in the US, in California in the late 80s. Were you in San Francisco at that point, or still in New York?
I went to San Francisco in 1990 just for a summer, so
right.
we didn't quite overlap. But I came after the earthquake.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were you there for the earthquake?
Yes,
Ah.
I was, yeah. And so that period of time for the gay community was in crisis with AIDS and HIV, and that would have been a time when you were coming into adult sexuality. How was that?
Well, I mean, imagine, it's already hard enough. You come out at 18, which means you haven't, kissed a boy in grade school or done any, fooling around in a back seat of anything. Like, it was just like, so you were trying to catch up on all that, like all the dating all at once. And meanwhile, sex is infused with this terror of death around it. And like, when I first came out, like, we didn't even know how you got it.
Yeah.
You know? Like deep kissing. I remember we were told no deep kissing. And if you haven't ever had sex before or done anything, and you're like, there's no deep kissing allowed?
Yeah.
It's totally allowed. You should totally do it. Yeah. Like, so it was terrifying. It was, for me, I'm already an incredibly anxious person.
Right.
So, and then there would be this ritual that all gay men I knew would do, which is that every 6 months you would get tested. And at that time, there would be like a 2-week lag before you got the results. So there was
I
this,
remember those days.
right? There was this awful 2 weeks where you would just go over everything, every deep kiss you'd ever, you're just wondering whether it would happen, And then you would be cleared, but it wouldn't clear you for recent time, and you'd be like, well, I have to do it again in 6 months. Awful.
Yeah. So your parents are scientists?
Yes.
Chemists?
Chemists.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when you told them you came out to your parents, was that being scientists, did they understand more of what was going on, or was it a mystery to them all?
Well, I would say they were shocked, not surprised.
Right.
And then my mother, later that night, came to me and she said, I think I'm gay too.
Wow.
Don't tell your father. Which made coming out super easy for me. Because there was like a bigger story, right, happening next to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Don't tell your father. So
Don't tell your father. She did tell him, yes. And they divorced soon
Right.
after, and
Yeah.
they get along very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so my mom came out around the same time I did, and I would go on dates with her. And that kind of thing, yeah. Go and sit at the bar together, lesbian bar in Washington D.C.
So is that weird?
It was like if your mother came to you and said, "I'm Spider-Man."
Right.
Don't tell your father.
Right.
It was super exciting. It was exciting to me because I thought that the gay thing was like something only I knew about and my friends, and then it seemed to be expanding. It was like it had annexed some other part of my life and gave me freedom to go there as well. I wasn't separated from and I was excited for her.
Yeah. And that must have been quite a different story from your peers.
I have to say, yeah, because like because it's 1989, and all my friends we had decided like we had to come out. This was like a movement in the 80s. Was like National Coming Out Day started around then, which is a thing in the United States. That if we all came out, then people would recognize that there were gay people all around them, and they would embrace us and treat us as human beings, and might understand that our death was something that had to be stopped, and it was a crisis. So it was a political movement. We all said we'd come out to our parents over Christmas break, and some of my friends, they were kicked out of their house, or disowned, or went very badly, and then I came back and I'm like, my mom's gay too. Seemed a little charmed. Yeah.
So, surprise. It seems in the reaction to your novel, Less, there seems like there's a lot of surprises all around. I mean, one of the things that I read a lot about was people saying, Less won the Pulitzer Prize, which is really amazing because it's a comedy.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you... You must have heard that a lot.
Yeah, I have heard it a lot. I've sort of I was also surprised, in my way.
Yeah.
But not so much that it was a comedy. A comedy, whatever a comedy is,
Well, yes, the
hasn't
different
really
meanings.
won like a a book you laugh out loud at hasn't won a Pulitzer Prize in probably 35 years. Probably The Confederacy of Dunces was a book that won. And it's because of this. I mean, it's this funny divide in culture that has sort of decided that comic novels can't be literary, which is funny because in the English language there's a really strong tradition of it.
Yeah.
You know, just even something like Woodhouse, which just seems like pure comedy. I think many people would be like, and also one of our great writers, in the language, just because it's all about language. That's what's funny in the book, is language. He's clearly so adept at it.
Yeah.
But also, I wasn't on that committee, so I don't have to explain their decisions. It just tickled me, as my mother would say, and I knew that I had made the book that was in my head, and it was a pleasure to make, and it was a pleasure to publish, and it was the shock of my life that it won that prize.
So I want to come back to that, the pleasure to make part in a moment. But I'm thinking about the political times that we live in, the Trump era, Brexit, and they're so, a performative moment. It's, troubled political times. You've spent 5 years writing this novel.
Yeah.
So it predates Trump and Brexit.
It does predate Trump and Brexit, yes.
But did you feel that it was the right time for something, for joy, laughter, to assert a different side beyond the political, or did this sneak up on you, this story?
I wish I could claim to be so
prophetic,
thoughtful of others,
right,
and prophetic. I will say that it started off very personally for me as trying to write. My other books don't have gay protagonists, and I thought I really need to write one of those. I don't know what's wrong with me. I struggled because often I would write it and it would become a little melodramatic and self-pitying, and I didn't like that in myself.
right,
And so I would throw it away. And this one, I said, I'm going to try to do it. And I couldn't crack it for years.
Yeah.
I just didn't. It was self-pitying.
Yeah.
And
so in what way?
Well, it would just be very, very looking out at the foggy San Francisco window, kind of thing. And I was like, he owns property in San Francisco. It's really hard to feel bad for someone like that. And then I did one day, while swimming in the San Francisco Bay, it just occurred to me, I'm desperate. I'll do anything to fix this book. And I thought, I'll see if I'll just make fun of him instead.
So let me get this straight. So swimming in the San Francisco Bay
Yes.
is part of the pleasurable making.
I know, it's very cold there.
Yeah.
What is it in centigrade, Enrico?
Oh, probably minus 20.
11. Well, at that point, once I wanted to make it a comedy, then I did think I would love a book on my shelf in which that was a story about a gay man that showed some of the joy that I think is part of the community, or at least my life, a little bit, and that didn't end in despair.
From the what you described as self-pitying into joy, how did that flip?
Because since my plan was to torture my character and take everything away from him, that was my way I would get to reward him at some point. So that doesn't sound like joy probably to most of you. But it felt like to me writing it. And I think also a joy, and this will sound pretentious, but we were talking about Proust earlier, the way that Proust doesn't seem joyful if you write it, or like a summary of it, like Monty Python or something, but on every page it's full of joy because it's full of precise descriptions of the world that are kind of ecstatic. And I wanted the details of the book to feel that way for him, that he's someone traveling you love traveling, I know, that when you travel, it's terrifying, but
Yeah.
also it's joyous because it's full of surprise, and your senses are turned on in some way. And I wanted the book to feel like that.
Feeling alive to the
Feeling
world.
alive. So
Yeah.
even no matter what he's going through, I hope that he comes across as someone who's really feeling alive, that life is sort of happening to him
Yeah.
electrically.
So when you're swimming in the San Francisco Bay,
Oh, yeah, you just love that detail, don't you?
I
Okay.
do, because I like to keep track of the different rituals that writers have.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's, you hear stories like Dame Edith Sitwell used to lie in a coffin.
I have
You haven't heard that one?
with her
There was
enormous
another one,
jewelry. Yeah.
Anais Nin, I think it was Anais Nin would pick fleas off her cat to get into the zone. So various ones. So
Yes.
swimming in the San Francisco Bay,
Is meditative.
meditative.
It is.
Bracing.
It's because it's bracing at first. It's like a sheet of glass has been broken on top of you. And then at a certain point, your body's like, oh, well, I guess we're not going to deal with this, are we? Yeah. We're just
yeah.
going to go on? All right, fine. And it shuts down, and then you kind of feel nothing. You know,
Yeah.
you have 40 minutes in that water. And it's beautiful. It's a Golden Gate Bridge and Alcatraz and whatever the weather is doing. Not what it does here. And the currents are happening, and so your body's involved. And you're not experiencing the cold anymore, and so you're just there, or at least I'm there just with my thoughts. And I specifically try to put a problem in my head about my book.
Right. So it's not a meditative in the sense of emptying out thoughts. It's you will work through.
Well, and I put the problem in my head, and then I kind of don't think about it.
Yeah.
But by the end, something's happened.
Right.
Yeah, I count on that.
And do you ever get out early and write things down? Or?
Oh, I have to go to the sauna right away. I can't write anything down.
Yeah.
I count how many ideas I've had. I say 3 ideas.
Yeah.
And I try to remember what they are. But if I count them, then when I come out, I was like, okay, there were 3.
Right.
Write them
Yeah.
down. I'm
Yeah.
usually good about that. I should
Yeah.
say I always go swimming with another friend of mine who's a writer, a children's book writer. He writes under the name Lemony Snicket.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Wow.
And he always has ideas at the end of it. Yeah. He's very, very prolific
He
writer.
swims in the bay too.
He does. Yeah.
Okay. We might have to take this up.
It's pretty good, yeah.
So think about language. I mean, that's, I think, one of the real joys of your novel is of course it's a character, it's the premise of it, but it's a language-driven narrative. And I think for me, it was one of the great pleasures of reading this book that became, I think, one of my favorite books in many years, and so many people I've spoken to speak of it with deep affection. And I think it's largely for your character that you've created, but it's also that I think a lot of novels these days tend to write as if they're envisioning a scene in a film, whereas this has an interiority to it that's language-driven.
That is the loveliest thing you could have said to me. Yeah. I really love books, and I love storytelling, especially early 20th century storytelling. That's very booky.
Yeah.
A narrator who can speak to you and the reader, or to you, another character, and then go into their head and sometimes go like that
Yeah.
power that film has no access to.
That's right. Sometimes they try the voiceover, but I always think they're cheating when they do that.
Well, and then how can you do something like in a novel? You can say years later he would look back on that moment and remember only the blackbird on the railing, but there in the swimming pool with a piece of cake in front of him. I'm like, that sentence makes sense to you when you're reading it, but you can't film it. It's the human experience of everything happening, the past and present and worry of the future happening all at the same time that film is so literal it can't do.
So do you notice that in fiction somewhat a trend towards the observable description versus the interior experience an idea? Is that something?
Sometimes, I mean,
I
sometimes.
mean, you were talking about Proust earlier.
Yeah, that's awfully famously unfilmable. I'm not that great on contemporary literature because I think I sometimes find that, and I read books so that I can steal from them for my book.
Yeah.
And so if I come across a book that
valid.
is perfectly wonderful and a beautiful story, but that feels filmic, it doesn't help me because it's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So I just go back and read more Muriel Spark or something.
Yeah.
You know, that's almost that's certainly unfilmable, except for the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. So I don't know if there's I can't tell if there's a trend because I'm too old-fashioned.
Yeah. So we're talking about conversation before, and then language as the medium. In your Protagonists travels to Berlin, he does a writing workshop.
Yes.
Yes. And part of that is to sort of to awaken people to language so that they're alive to the words that are used, that we sort of swim in. Do you want to talk a little bit about what they do? Or?
Well, which I think I hope I do a couple times in this book, is that the narrator first makes fun of Arthur Less, and then you actually find it really charming when he's done, because he does an almost kindergarten kind of exercises with these graduate students in Germany, and graduate students in Germany are, well,
serious?
very more serious than the United States.
Right.
Like, they really read the stuff,
Yeah.
they do the work, you know, Herr Professor. But he has them do these ridiculous things where they focus on one word, or they gives them white out to go through a paragraph and white out what they don't want, or cuts out the sentences with a glue stick to stick in a different order. And it says in the book that it makes them love literature again, makes them love language again, and makes them love him. So it goes from ridiculing this technique to kind of, who knows what they really learned. But maybe, like so many of us who get involved in, because we love books and then we study them and then we teach them, and there can be a dryness to it at some point that it's nice to remember what you love about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've studied creative writing in a writing program?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And that was in Montana?
The University of Montana, which is in the Rocky Mountains near Canada. Yeah.
And how was that? Was that productive for you?
Are those common here or not so much?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
It's not on the scale of the U.S., but...
In the U.S., it's everywhere. In a way, because they're slight money makers for universities, because people can sign up and pay a lot of money for the courses, and they're promised nothing. Right? Because it's like, who knows? But, I did it. I loved it. I loved it. I don't think the classes were worth anything.
Oh, really?
But...
have some more wine.
They'll never hear this. But I was living in New York City, and you would think that that would be the center of the writing world, but it's the center of the publishing world. And to go to a rural place where almost everyone I knew were young writers and poets, and there was nothing. Everyone was broke. There was nothing. There was no cool club to go to. There was no fashion or anything. So all we did was sit around and drink beer in bars where there would be like a bar fight would break out around midnight, and we'd all have to climb under the pool table. We'd talk about poetry and books. It was just a dream.
Yeah.
It was a dream. And it was, it made me a writer, really, because there was we forgot there was any other path, that there was a real world. And the professors were perfectly lovely. But it's, one thing is that I'm not sure what you can really teach. You can encourage and you can try to get students to read widely, which is hard to do when you're young. You go into a bookstore and you see the bestseller list or the Pulitzer Prize winners or something like that. And like when I have taught in creative writing programs, and I often take them into a used bookstore, and I give them $5, and I say, I want you to buy a book that you've never heard of by an author you've never heard of that you're just drawn to. And they've never done it, not since they were kids.
Yeah.
And I think as a writer, that you need to hone in on your taste.
Yeah.
It's hard to find that.
I might have the antithesis of that. When people ask me, I'll say, read everything you hate.
Oh, that's great. And why do you tell them to do that?
Because if you are drawn to, say, a particular genre, a particular style, it can be a sort of a imitation, pale side of it. If you forced yourself to read a completely different style, it just opens it up. And then you can question, why do I hate that? What is good about it? Or the other way, if you're saying, I don't read literary fiction, I only read this other one, well, read it.
I'm going to completely steal that. But I would do that. I remember there was I had a young student an Indian American student who'd never been to India, but she wanted to write about India.
Right.
And so she was reading only Indian authors. And I said, that is really great.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you Cherie by Colette.
Right.
Because I think that might open a door for you. You're feeling blocked and nervous about writing about a country that you don't know that well, but whose culture you're steeped in and you want to be part of. So you need to go somewhere out from the outside. And she just loved it. Had never occurred to her.
Yeah.
She was going down the path that was really causing her anxiety. And Colette was just not going to be her cup of tea, she thought. But
right. Yeah.
that's
Just
great
opens the door.
advice. Yeah.
So travel for you opened a door for the novel, from what I've heard.
Yeah,
That it was,
yes.
You went back to Italy, was it?
Yeah, I went back to Italy. That's where I started this book, actually. Not quite out of the San Francisco Bay. But it's hard for me to remember exactly. Your mind starts to fog over, and you start to make up a story for yourself about what happened.
You're a writer.
So, I'm sure I wrote a bunch of stuff, but then I went to Italy to this residency where I was not yet director. I was just going to stay with my friend, the Baronessa, for a few weeks. And I sat down and started writing it.
Yeah.
For me, travel really is liberating in that way. And I sat and I wrote the Italian chapter in 2 weeks, and I changed hardly anything.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, which never happens.
Yeah. No, I'm a great, reviser.
I'm a big reviser,
Yeah.
but that one just sort of was I knew
So
it-
that was a sign
Yeah.
that this is.
Oh, well, I'd been so desperately a failure with the book that I was like, I'm going to go this way.
Yeah.
This is the only path there is. It
Yeah.
leads the wrong direction, but I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes some of the comments that is made about American literature, which I think is phenomenal. It's a great cultural literature, but is that it can be quite inward looking.
I can be even more, it can be worse than that. I think it's parochial.
Do you?
Yeah. I think American.
In a good way?
No.
No.
I think we're concerned mostly just about America, and our references are often only to other American writers, that it's becomes, completely insular in a way that in a world like ours is dangerous, but also just for writers you run out of stuff.
Yeah.
And we don't translate that many books in the United States. We don't invite that many foreign writers. That influence doesn't quite make it in. And for me, for instance, going to Italy and living with the Baronessa, I was opened up to a world of writers I didn't know about, which made me ashamed. And to travel also did that. Brought me out of my Americanness slightly. I sit here in a denim jacket before you.
But so, Americans being such a powerful cultural influence, everyone goes to America, that they haven't tended to travel as much as. I often think everywhere you go, you'll find one Australian and 2 New Zealanders.
Yeah, it's true, you do.
Sitting down in the southern hemisphere, that we tend to go out and go, what's happening in the world? Now that comes perhaps with other issues, what we might call cultural cringe or not feeling confident in our own culture, but we're big travellers. So you've, as an American, you sort of are, in some ways, stand out for that interest in travel. I mean, it was the expatriate writers of the modernists. And
Right.
then,
Yeah.
And then they went back to the great American novel.
Right, the great American novel, which is such a boring term. It also comes with it, like, appended to it is who you're imagining the great American novelist is going to be.
Yeah.
And America, it's going to be a 60-year-old straight white guy, right, in your head. And there's wonderful ones. But most American novelists don't look like that anymore. So we have to erase that whole concept. My new thing is to try to travel within the United States. Having a country that just did something, elected someone so ridiculous, I am trying to figure out what happened. And the way that traveling the world is for me about discovering I'm wrong about everything. That I'm wrong. My way of flushing a toilet apparently isn't going to work in this toilet. So let's think about the possibilities of human experience, and figure it out. And to discover that there's like what I think is normal is arbitrary, and like which side of the road to drive on is the most obvious one. It's an arbitrary decision. You don't make fun of the other side. You make fun of the American looking that way.
I look both ways.
Yeah, I just don't move. I have a publicist to lead me across the road. But it's eye-opening about yourself when you travel and realize just how wrong all the time you are. And I'm trying to go through America and try to see. It's hard to do it about my own country. I don't feel the same humility. I feel such anger, but I'm trying to. Anger doesn't help when I'm traveling. So at one point I rented a camper van and went to the Southwest for 3 weeks and just went to bars and diners and to try to get people's life stories and didn't talk about politics at all.
And how was that?
It was great and sad.
Yeah.
People are suffering.
Right.
Yeah.
Economically, is that the...
Economically, and I'm sorry we've gone into this topic. Who cares, But it was interesting. It was. I could feel that, and what I learned was that everyone had the story, the most important story in their life. They were dying to tell someone, and they were just waiting for permission to do it to a stranger. It didn't take anything at all to learn about the kid they had to give away when they were 17, or their parents who abandoned them, or they never got to go to college, or all kinds of stories. I would get it all the time. A lot of it was about having a kid too soon or being given up for adoption. I met 2 people who had refound adoptive parents from both, or the kid they gave up for adoption. At one point I was like, is it the same ones? Have I connected them? Yeah, it was sad. People were very kind, but were suffering.
So with traveling, and finding out who you are in a different context, I mean, it's a little bit like growing older too. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is with aging and the narratives that we tell as we live longer. What are the new stories? It's as if for a number of novelists are at a frontier as we go into living into the 80s, 90s, 100. I mean, when I think of a lot of my favorite authors, they died in their 50s and 60s. And so this is a new era. But I think within the gay community, there's another story that's going on there.
Well, I had, it was tragic enough to go through what we both went through, which was to watch all these men die by the tens of hundreds of thousands, and to live through it and to make it out. And then it didn't occur to me for a while that the whole generation, not the whole generation, but many men in the generation above me were not going to be there for me to watch as a role model of how to get older.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to see this huge group of men go from 25 to 35 to 45 to 55. I would have a few incredible examples. And so...
And to work out those life stages.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean,
which
why...
are tricky for anyone.
And I've also wondered, like, well, what's so different about being a gay man and going through those? And I've thought about it. I thought, well, one thing is that I think, you know, when I was a teenager, there was my best friend, her mom, who didn't like me, whose name was Ma'am, smoked cigarette, smoked martinis, which I did like. She said, "Enjoy your youth, Greer. There's nothing sadder than an old queen." And that stuck with me because, and I know what she meant. She was thinking, this was the 80s, she was thinking of those men in their 60s and 70s then with like dyed gold hair that she found so sad.
Yeah.
And I was like, I guess that's what there wasn't a sense of getting older and getting more dignified. There was a sense of becoming a figure of ridicule. And so I've had to look at some men to see how to do that. And some of it's making it up, which is what everyone does anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And figuring out how to dress without, that's not short shorts and a tank top so much. Yeah.
So, do you think that was the turn towards the personal relationship and love and the fight for gay marriage? Do you think that comes as a reaction to the loneliness of that period?
But here's going to be me making things up in front of you.
Conversation.
Yeah, I mean, here's my hot take on it. 30 years in the making, which is, I think, the generation right before mine was coming out of the sexual revolution, and then it was men. It was all about sexual freedom, non-monogamy. Sometimes boyfriends and connections, but a lot of the idea was being totally free. And then I recall when AIDS came in that the idea was you had to get a boyfriend, which older men thought was outrageous. That was a betrayal of what they had fought for. That the idea was not to get a boyfriend, be monogamous, get married, but it was a survival technique at that point. And also, I was hopelessly romantic. It's what I wanted.
Yeah.
You know, like, and a lot of young men didn't, but I think it's driven by that. I think it's driven also by the fact that, you know, like in the 70s, in the 60s, to be an out queer person, you would be like a wild bohemian personality. It took a lot to do that.
Yeah.
And that now it doesn't. So like other less bohemian personalities come out who like wanted to get married to a woman, and they're like, oh, well, I like men, so I'll get married to men. There was never a come to Jesus moment of, you know.
Yeah.
It was a sort of easy switch. Thank God, how wonderful,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So it's not, in some ways in my mind I have a story that the queer community got more conservative, and then I corrected with like, but it got a lot bigger. It embraced a lot more people.
Yeah.
That wasn't just the ones marching in the streets, but the ones who probably never will, but are out.
Yeah.
And like we fought for that.
And you won.
Yeah, you guys won, so.
Well, I think now would be a good time to open up to questions from the audience. We have a mic over here and another one on this side. Here's a question in the middle.
Two questions, if I may. First of all, were you tempted to turn it into a tragedy rather than have the happy ending?
Are you giving away the ending, madam?
I worked hard to avoid that.
It doesn't matter, yeah.
And the other question, did you start off with the big age difference? Was that always an essential part, or did that come as you were writing the book?
Those are two great questions that won't make sense to people who haven't read it, but you're here. I insisted in my head on having the ending that I have. That's the ending I wanted. My editor wanted me to cut the ending slightly, and I said to her, "You were totally right. I need to change the rest of the book." because I knew that's what I wanted, and I wanted to get that. The whole point of the book was to do that. The age difference was, I mentioned Cherie by Colette, and the novel started off as a version of that. If you've never read Cherie, you have a treat in store for you. It's about a 53-year-old courtesan, a woman, who has been a sort of nave scuola, they say in Italian, like an older woman who teaches a young man the ropes of a 20-year-old man. And later he gets married to someone else, and they realize they're the love of each other's lives. And that's a larger difference than the one in my book. But it really interested me. It interested me that a gay man could start off being the younger man in a relationship like that, and at a certain point age out and become the older man in the same relationship. I thought, well, that's really, I hadn't seen it before, that you would have to look at what you used to be and think about what that is. So it also gives it, in a novel you're always looking for patterns if you don't have plot, which mine doesn't. So you're looking for structures and mirrored things. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
Arthurless. Now, you and I are about the same vintage. Why Arthur?
It can't be. You
There
people
were
age
no
so
Arthurs
well. Yeah.
So why Arthur?
Why name him Arthur?
Yeah, because when I went to school, there were absolutely no Arthurs.
Well,
Where did Arthur come from?
that's a very good question. I have no idea. I honestly don't. Because I look back on, I have all the names in my books I make up on the spot. I don't think about them again. But Arthur was his name when it was a sort of tragic novel that I was talking about. It was more like Cherie. And, but his last name was Arthur Powers. And then when I made it a comedy, I was like, that won't do. So I made him Arthur Less.
So
It's very obvious now that I say it, yeah.
my theory is completely wrong then, because I thought Arthur, author, and I was thinking authorless, and then I had a whole narrative.
Yeah, I meant
going.
that too.
Yeah. So you admit it.
Oh, it's all yes. Every reading is true in its way, right? So,
So no Arthur, author.
I hadn't thought about it till now, but I'm going to use that one. That's very good. As an author, you're often caught by very intelligent readings of your book, often in Europe, and you say, "Yes, I meant that all along."
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Thank you. We have time for a few more. There's some at the back. And one at the front. Hi.
Well, people.
Right behind
some
you.
people are hard of hearing, so let's give them a chance.
Andrew, just interested to understand how much of your book was inspired by your actual life, and are you really very self-pitying like your character?
Do I seem too full of confidence in front of you?
No.
I'm having a very giddy year, as you might imagine. People often ask about authors how autobiographical they are, and this one is egregiously seems autobiographical.
It's about your twin, right?
Right. I even look like the art on the cover in some ways, And I will say I was shameless in drawing heavily from some of my experiences and observations and notes that I took as I traveled, and I would sit and think of the most humiliating thing that ever happened to me, and I would give it to Arthur. And then I would fictionalize it and make it funnier by, exaggerating it the way you do, when you've told a story a bunch of times, you make it a little bit more this way. I often think like it's fun to find out what's autobiographical, but I would love never to tell you. Because I worked hard to make it like a novel, the way Victor Frankenstein worked hard to sew those parts of other men into this other thing. And when Frankenstein stumbles into the room, you don't say, now, is that hand part of that foot? You're like, oh my God, a monster's in the room, right? So hopefully you get the monster effect. And then once it wears off, then you start asking, like, is that hand? Yeah, which is where you are probably.
Yeah, it's that whole Carly Simon trick. You just want to keep the keep
Right,
that
yeah.
secret. Sell
Who
it
is
off
that
later.
song about? Yeah.
One last question. Yeah.
Hi, so I want to talk about the moment that you, revealed the narrator of the story.
We shan't give it away, but I can
We
talk
won't-
about it. Yeah.
No spoilers, no spoilers. But from a reader's point of view, moving from feeling a little betrayed, I will admit, to actually enjoying that aspect of the novel. So I guess I want to ask you why you did that.
It's a good question. It was my plan all along. It's a technique stolen from a Nabokov novel, Penin, in which he does something similar. And when he does it, it feels a little cruel. That's Nabokov for you. And it's a brilliant novel. And I wanted it to feel like that you'd read a love letter and didn't know it. And that little noise they made is the one I wanted. So that's why I did it. And that is what my editor wanted to cut. And that's what I wanted to keep. Yeah. Because she was like, everyone's enjoying the book. Why get risky at the end? Yeah.
This has been a real joy for me. I'm sure. Who's read this already? Oh, everyone.
Oh, man!
We could have talked about the ending.
That is really touching.
Oh. Well, if you have your copies here, you're available for signing.
Yeah, of course I am.
Outside. Thank you all for coming along.
And thank you, Bronwyn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.